He was born in 1710 in the little town of Gelterkinden, outside of Basel, Switzerland, in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. He was born to a mother who he did not have a father. I mean, obviously, physically he had a father, yeah, but it was a father who took no responsibility. He was a traveling salesperson, and so he did not acknowledge his son or offer any support. So essentially, Hans Georg Gerster was raised by a single mother, a situation that is not uncommon in our own country in these times, but back then it was a scandal. If you were born illegitimate, number one, you were not a citizen. Number two, you could not vote. Number three, you could not hold property. And oftentimes, you could not get a job. They were like a person, or rather more like a non-person in that country. His mother tried very hard through the court system to get the father to acknowledge paternity, which would then have made Hans Georg a legitimate person, but he declined over a period of certainly probably more like 15 to 20 years. When he met a girl that he wanted to marry, they decided together that they would emigrate to America where there would be opportunities for them. And so, because his mother was single and he was the only child, he took responsibility for his mother as well. So Hans Georg made arrangements to emigrate to America with his fiancée, who was Eva Geisen, and his mother, who was Elsbeth Spar. And they left behind everything that was dear to them. They left behind their home, their family, their friends, their church, a minister who had been responsible for Hans Georg becoming a Christian. Everything was left behind, and they had no idea what to expect when they arrived in the United States of America. They sailed by a very crowded little boat from Basel up the Rhine River to a place called Rotterdam. It took 2 weeks to make that trip, and from there they made arrangements to get on a boat that would come to America. A lot of German and Swiss people were emigrating at the same time, so the boat that they finally arranged was called the Princess Augusta in 1536. I think this was the first trip that was taken on the boat. It was a new boat built to accommodate the influx of German and Swiss immigrants to this country in the early part of the 18th century. So they came to this country. I'm sure that, I suspect when you talk to my brother Dick, he gave him a lot of the same information.
He did in different ways, yeah.
Okay. Well, the trip took 6 weeks. And from some of the reports that we have from letters of the people who were on the boat, who were also dear friends and Christian friends of Hans Georg and Eva and Elsbeth, when they got within sight of Philadelphia, the winds changed and the boat was driven back out to sea, and a lot of people on board just thought this was the end. They were probably going to die. But and so they prayed fervently, and the winds changed back, and it brought them back into the port of Philadelphia, and they disembarked there. Okay, well, when they got to this country, it was still under the control of the English government. Mm-hmm. 1736, and King George III was on the throne. So we were not a United States of America. And so the English because they brought with them on the boat all of their household belongings, like stoves and cookware and so forth and so on, that they needed to start in a brand new country, and a very primitive country still at that time. But the English, because their goods had not been manufactured in England, confiscated all of them, so they had nothing left with which to start a home or family. Hans George, I didn't prepare any notes for this. Hans George took a position as an indentured worker for a period of time, just to earn money to take care of his wife and his mother. I don't know how long that period of time lasted, but eventually he made pretty good money, and he was able to buy a house and a farm, and became a farmer. He also worked part-time, I think, as what they would call a saddler, a person who worked with leather to make saddles, which obviously were needed for people who were riding horses, primary means of transportation 100, 200 years ago, 275 years ago. Eventually, his farm prospered, and we know that from the tax records that are still on file, and grew. He had a child who's also is named Hans George Castor. In fact, he had 6 children, 4 of whom we know about. He had 7 children, 4 of whom we know their offspring. Other 3 we don't know about them. They may have died in childbirth, or they may have gotten married, and no record was kept of whom it was. He was a Christian man. He became a Christian and not part of any of the, this was early and after the Reformation, and the Lutheran Church was very strong in Germany, and the Catholic Church was, of course, still a power. And because he was neither Lutheran nor Catholic, this was when he was still in Switzerland. Because he was neither Lutheran or Catholic, there was a lot of discrimination. He's called himself a pietist, which means a man is simply trying to lead a holy life, but not by the rules of the Lutheran Church, not by the rules of the Catholic Church, but by the rules of the Bible. He brought that very serious faith with him and his wife and his mother to this country. And early on, he and the other German and Swiss immigrants helped to found a church in Philadelphia, actually probably in the province, the township of Frankfurt, that was what they called a German Reformed church, following more carefully the teachings of Calvin, John Calvin, and Zwingli. That church eventually became a Presbyterian church. It's still down there in Philadelphia, and we can see the name of Castor on their stained glass windows. I think we may have seen pictures of that at some time. So we know that they were very active, and one of the members of his family, one of his children, was a treasurer for the church, and others took other responsibilities, but they were active in the formation of a church. I do know that later in his life, he suffered enough from physical weakness that he couldn't continue to actively farm himself, so he found other employment. I'm tempted to say that I think he did a lot of weaving just to help generate money for the family. but I'm not really sure of that.